Bernard Okafor had worked the front door of the Aldenmere Hotel for 19 years, and he knew, within 10 seconds of a man arriving, what kind of evening he was going to have. The single dad pulled up in a 10-year-old sedan. Clean he would give him that, but plain as a work boot against the procession of covered trailers and polished haulers. Bringing the collector cars in, he stepped out in his valet jacket, which fit well enough, and he had the kind of hands that had spent years with engines, not the manicured hands of the men inside, but hands that knew what they were doing. He had a small girl with him, maybe 7, with braids and a school backpack, and he settled her in the staff break room with a sandwich and a library book before he came back out to the stand. Bernard noted all of it. He said nothing. The Aldenmere's annual Collectors' Charity Gala drew the serious money every June. The men who owned things, not the men who made them. Gerald Prentice led that world, or believed he did. The consortium he chaired held licensing rights to the most widely used restoration blueprint in the private collector market, and he arrived that evening in a silver suit and the manner of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. The guest of honor vehicle was a 1961 Grand Tourer, considered one of the finest surviving examples on the continent. It had been trailered in from a private collection in Vermont, and when the handlers rolled it into the motor court for its pre-gala inspection, the single dad, whose name Bernard had learned from the rota sheet, was Ray Collier, walked a slow circle around it and stopped at the rear left. He crouched. He looked a long time. Then he went to the gala floor entrance and spoke quietly to one of the event coordinators. The car had a brake line weep, he said, barely visible. But there. It should not be driven or moved until it was looked at properly. The coordinator brought this to Prentice. Prentice came to the motor court, looked at the car, looked at Ray Collier, and did what Bernard had seen powerful men do. When a small inconvenience arrived wearing a work jacket, that car was inspected by 3 certified specialists this week, Prentice said, loud enough for the cluster of guests drifting in behind him to hear. And you are a parking attendant. He paused. Cars like yours don't belong on this block. Or they're drivers in my event. He turned to the event security and said something low and brief. Bernard watched Ray Collier stand very still. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He said once quietly to the coordinator, "Have someone look at that line before anyone moves the car." Then he walked to the break room, gathered his daughter and her backpack, and left through the service exit. Bernard held the front door and said nothing. He told himself it was not his place. The gala ran its first hour smoothly. Cocktails, catalog walkthroughs, the low, pleasant roar of wealthy men discussing their collections. Then the lead auctioneer, a woman named Helen Marsh, who ran the most respected car auction house in the Northeast, asked for the guest of honor vehicle to be brought forward for the evening's centerpiece presentation. The handlers went to the motor court. 20 minutes later, one of them came back in and spoke to Helen Marsh in a voice pitched low and careful. Bernard, near the entrance, saw her face change. The brake line had opened, not catastrophically, a slow seep that had pooled on the motor court stone. No one had been hurt, but the car could not be moved, and the presentation could not proceed until it was addressed. The event coordinator, pale now, asked if anyone on staff had a hydraulic brake background. Helen Marsh, who had been in this world long enough to recognize the gravity of what had just not happened, picked up the car's logbook from the presentation table. She was not looking for anything in particular, only orienting herself to the car's service history, the way careful people do when things go wrong. She found, in the margin of the 2019 restoration entry, a notation system she recognized, not the content. The system, the shorthand, the bracket conventions, the way measurements were logged, in a particular sequence that she had seen before, in another document entirely. She set the logbook down and opened her tablet. She pulled up the consortium's licensed restoration blueprint, the one Gerald Prentice's organization had been distributing to collectors and restoration shops for 6 years, the one that had become the industry's informal standard. She looked at the logbook. She looked at the tablet. She looked at them for a long time. Then she walked to the event coordinator and asked a single question. Which valet had flagged the brake line earlier? Bernard was the one who made the call. He had Ray Collier's number from the rota sheet, and he stepped outside to use it, away from the noise and the marble and the silver suits. The line rang 4 times. "Mr. Collier," Bernard said when it picked up. "This is Bernard Okafor, doorman at the Aldenmere. I owe you an apology for earlier, and Helen Marsh, the auctioneer, is asking if you'd be willing to come back in. A pause. Cora's asleep, Ray Collier said. I'll have the break room ready, Bernard said. Same sandwich situation. I'll sit with her myself if you'll let me. Another pause, shorter. 20 minutes, Ray Collier said. He arrived in 20s too. Bernard held the front door for him, the front door, not the service entrance, and said, "Thank you for coming back," and meant it in a way he could not have explained 1 hour earlier. Helen Marsh met him in the corridor off the gala floor. She had the logbook and the tablet, and she showed him both without preamble. "This notation system," she said. "The bracket sequencing, the measurement logging, it's yours." Ray Collier looked at the tablet for a moment. "The blueprint was sold to a documentation firm in 2019, he said. "I needed the money. My wife had just died. I didn't think it would become—" He stopped. "I didn't follow up. The firm sold the licensing rights to the consortium the following year," Helen Marsh said. "For considerably more." She said the number. Ray Collier was quiet. "You have a claim," she said. "A significant one. I'd like to help you make it if you're willing." Behind them, through the open corridor door, Gerald Prentice was visible at the edge of the gala floor. He was watching his silver suit looked, all at once, less certain of itself, Bernard. Standing at the corridor entrance because he was Bernard, and he had been at the Aldenmere 19 years. And he went where he felt he was needed, watched Ray Collier look at Helen Marsh's tablet, and at the logbook, and at nothing in particular for a moment. Then he said, "I need to check on my daughter first." Bernard smiled. He couldn't help it. 30 days later, the consortium renegotiated. The legal process was not painless, but it was fast, because Helen Marsh's auction house had impeccable documentation, and because the notation system in the logbook matched the blueprint's original manuscript with the kind of precision that made arguments short. The settlement was not announced publicly. The consortium asked for that. The collector's world is small, however, and people in it talk, and by the time the first week of July arrived, the serious money knew exactly what Gerald Prentice's ejection of a parking attendant had cost his organization, and what it had revealed about whose work they had all been relying on for 6 years. Prentice did not attend the consortium's next event. Ray Collier enrolled Cora into the school she had wanted, the one with the science program, the one she had circled in the brochure with a red marker, and left on the kitchen table where he would see it. He took her himself on the first morning, and she held his hand walking in, and then she didn't, because she was 7, and there were other kids to look at, and he stood at the gate for a while in the September light. Helen Marsh happened to drive past. She had not planned to, but she saw him at the gate, and she pulled over, and she rolled down the window, and she said, "How is she?" "Good," Ray Collier said. "And you?" He thought about that for a moment, the way he thought about most things, carefully, without hurry. "Getting there," he said. Helen Marsh nodded. She did not drive away immediately. Bernard heard all of this later, in pieces, the way you hear things when you have worked a front door for 19 years. And people trust you because you have held it open for them in every kind of weather. He turned it over for a long time. He had been at that door long enough to know what kind of evening a man was going to have. What he had not known, what he understood now, standing in the September morning in his own mind, was that the kind of man Ray Collier had been visible from the first 10 seconds, too. He had simply been looking at the car. He didn't make that mistake again.